After selling my engineering firm for $35 million last month, I hosted my 68th birthday party. But just before the toast, I saw my son-in-law inject something into my wine glass with a medical syringe. So when no one was watching, I secretly swapped glasses with his father. The wine glass left my son-in-law's hand at the same instant his father hit my living room floor. His father's body jerked like a marionette, with the strings yanked too hard, sweat purling on his forehead as his breathing became labored. The cheerful birthday chatter strangled into silence. Someone screamed. Someone else fumbled with a phone and yelled for 911. I didn't move. My birthday party ended with the wailing of ambulance sirens. What unfolded next was a calculated battle between a desperate man willing to kill family for money and a grandfather who turned 40 years of problem-solving experience into the perfect trap. Let me know in the comments what country or state you're watching from. I want to see how far this story about the ultimate family betrayal has reached around the world. My name is Calvin Brewster, and at 68 I thought I'd seen enough of life's surprises. 40 years as a civil engineer in Denver had taught me to spot structural problems before they became disasters. But nothing in my professional experience had prepared me for the kind of betrayal that was about to unfold in my own living room. Last month, I'd sold my engineering consulting firm for a sum that had left me with assets worth just over $35 million. The sale had been driven largely by the patent portfolio I'd developed over decades, revolutionary bridge joint systems that were now used in earthquake zones worldwide. The family knew I'd come into significant money, though I'd kept the exact details to myself, a decision that was looking wiser by the day. It was a cold February evening, and I was hosting my birthday party in the suburban home I'd called Sanctuary for the past decade. The house felt warm and alive with family, something I'd learned not to take for granted after losing my first wife, Margaret, to cancer 25 years ago. Dorothy, my second wife, whom I'd married 10 years ago, was fussing over the homemade birthday cake in the kitchen. At 65, she still insisted on doing everything from scratch, despite my protests. That store-bought would be fine. She'd been the unexpected blessing of my later years, bringing laughter back into a house that had been too quiet for too long. Dad Marcus's parents just pulled up, called Sarah my 35-year-old daughter, as she arranged flowers by the window. Sarah taught elementary school and had inherited her mother Margaret's gentle spirit, though she'd gotten my stubborn streak when it came to seeing the best in people sometimes when she shouldn't. Through the front window, I watched Robert Mason Sr. and Linda, my son-in-law's parents, climb out of their sedan. Robert moved carefully. He'd been having back trouble lately. Good people, both of them. The kind of salt-of-the-earth folks who'd raised their son to be better than what he'd apparently become. Marcus Mason, my daughter's husband of 5 years, had been pacing my living room for the past hour, checking his phone every 30 seconds. At 37, he should have been in his prime as a real estate agent, but lately he'd carried himself like a man drowning in deep water. 8 months ago, Marcus had come to me with a business proposition, a $75,000 investment opportunity that would set the family up for years. Being a father who wanted to help his daughter's future, I'd written the check. It wasn't until I started seeing casino withdrawal slips mixed in with his business receipts that I realized where my money had really gone. The confrontation last summer had been painful, but necessary. No more loans. Marcus, I told him, holding up bank statements that told the whole sordid story, not until you get help. Tonight, something was different. Marcus had that desperate, sweaty-palmed look again, but sharper. His phone buzzed and his face went white. I caught a glimpse of the message, final notice, Monday deadline. Let me help with the drinks, Marcus volunteered suddenly, his voice pitched too high. His hands shook as he reached for the wine bottles I'd set out. While Sarah chatted with Robert and Linda in the living room, I positioned myself where I could observe the kitchen. Marcus uncorked the wine with the concentration of a man defusing a bomb. Then I saw something that made my blood turn to ice water. From his jacket pocket, Marcus withdrew a small medical syringe. I couldn't tell what was in it. The liquid was clear, but I watched, in horrified fascination, as he injected the contents into my usual wine glass, the one with the small chip on the rim that I always used, so guests wouldn't get the damaged stemware. He knew my habits. He'd planned this. The syringe disappeared back into his pocket. Marcus arranged the glasses with the care of a funeral director, preparing flowers, sweat beading on his forehead despite the winter chill. My engineering mind kicked into overdrive. Marcus was desperate, that much was clear, but desperate enough for what had been in that syringe. I needed to be certain before I acted. Moving casually, I approached the kitchen island. "These look perfect," I said, and in one smooth motion I switched my chipped glass with the one he'd poured for his father, Robert Sr. If Marcus had put something harmless in that glass, then Robert would be fine. But if my son-in-law had just tried to poison me, then his own father was about to pay the price. Marcus didn't notice the switch. He was too busy staring at his phone. We carried the glasses into the living room where Dorothy had just finished lighting the candles. Robert Sr. accepted his wine with a grateful smile. Linda raised her glass in a toast, and Sarah beamed at her husband. I watched Marcus's face as his father took that first sip. For 45 minutes, nothing happened. Normal conversation, normal laughter. Marcus began to relax. Then Robert Sr. set down his empty glass and wiped his forehead. "Feeling a bit warm in here," he said, loosening his collar. Marcus looked up, noticed his father's flushed face, and his expression shifted from relief to confusion to dawning horror. "Dad, you okay?" Marcus asked, his voice cracking. Robert Sr. tried to stand and stumbled. Sweat poured down his face, and his breathing became rapid and labored. "I think something's wrong." Robert gasped and collapsed to my living room floor. Linda screamed. Sarah dropped her wine glass. Dorothy rushed for the phone to call 911. Marcus stared at his unconscious father with the expression of a man who just realized he'd poisoned the wrong person. Whatever had been in that syringe was now coursing through his father's system instead of mine. As the sirens wailed in the distance, I looked up at Marcus and saw the truth written across his guilty face. Some birthday parties end with cake and laughter. The ambulance ride to Presbyterian Hospital felt endless. I sat beside Robert Sr.'s stretcher while Marcus huddled in the corner, his face a mask of barely controlled panic. Every time the paramedics checked his father's vitals, Marcus would flinch, as if struck. Dorothy followed in our car with Sarah and Linda, who'd been sobbing since her husband collapsed in my living room. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who'd raised the man who tried to poison me was now suffering because of her son's actions. By 6 Sunday morning, Robert was stabilized in the ICU. Dr. Patricia Kim, a sharp-eyed physician in her 40s, emerged from his room with a puzzled expression. "We're treating this as a diabetic emergency," she explained to our family. "Severe hypoglycemia, dangerously low blood sugar." I watched Marcus's reaction carefully. Relief flickered across his face, quickly replaced by that same guilty anxiety. "But Dad's not diabetic," Linda said through her tears. "He's never had blood sugar problems." Dr. Kim frowned. "That's unusual. We'll investigate further." Marcus excused himself to make phone calls, pacing the corridors like a caged animal. I'd seen that behavior before in structural failures. The moment when an engineer realizes their miscalculation has caused catastrophic collapse. Sunday afternoon, I called Frank Rodriguez, my neighbor and retired Denver police detective. When he arrived, I pulled him aside and told him everything: the syringe, the injection, the switch I'd made, and Robert's collapse. Frank listened with the patience of a man who'd heard thousands of confessions. "Calvin," he said finally, "if what you're telling me is true, someone tried to murder you, and now an innocent man is fighting for his life." "I know how it sounds," I replied, "but I saw what I saw." Monday morning brought answers we weren't prepared for. Dr. Kim called us into a conference room, her expression grave. "Mr. Mason's blood work shows something very concerning. His insulin levels are astronomically high, nearly 10 times normal, even for a diabetic having an episode." Linda gasped. Marcus went pale. "But he's not diabetic," Sarah said, confused. "Exactly," Dr. Kim replied. "Someone gave him a massive dose of insulin. In a non-diabetic patient, this amount would be potentially fatal." The room fell silent except for Linda's quiet sobbing. I felt the weight of confirmation settle on my shoulders. Tuesday afternoon, the final test confirmed it. Dr. Kim was blunt. This wasn't an accident. Someone deliberately administered a lethal dose of insulin. Marcus stared at his hands, unable to meet anyone's eyes. That evening, I sat in my home office with a fresh engineering notebook. At the top of the first page, I wrote, "Marcus Mason Investigation." Frank sat across from my desk reviewing the timeline I'd sketched. "Calvin," he said, "insulin poisoning of a non-diabetic is attempted murder. This isn't family drama anymore. This is a felony that could have killed Robert." I looked at the notebook, then at my old friend. "What do I do, Frank?" "You document everything. Every suspicious behavior. Every conversation. Every inconsistency. Then we call Detective Maria Santos. She's good people." As I sat there, pen poised over the blank page, I thought about the engineering principle that had guided my career. Every system has a point of failure, and every failure leaves evidence. Marcus had tried to murder me and nearly killed his own father instead. Now it was time to build a case. I started writing, documenting the systematic destruction of trust. Some problems require blueprints to solve. Others require handcuffs. Wednesday morning, I sat in my home office with my engineering notebook and a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Frank's words echoed in my mind, document everything. So I started with what I knew: Marcus Mason, real estate agent, desperate enough to poison his own father. The Colorado Secretary of State's website yielded the first clues. Marcus's real estate license showed multiple complaints filed over the past 18 months. Failure to deposit earnest money. Missed closing deadlines. One particularly damning complaint alleged he'd used client funds for personal expenses. By Wednesday afternoon, Frank arrived with a manila folder thick with court documents. His contacts in the legal system had been busy. $400,000 in civil judgments, Frank said, spreading the papers across my desk. 3 different clients sued him for mishandling escrow accounts. The courts found in their favor, but Marcus never paid. I stared at the numbers, my engineer's mind automatically calculating compound interest and penalties. $400,000 that we know about. That's just what made it to court, Frank replied grimly. Thursday morning, I made a decision that probably violated every rule of personal safety. I followed Marcus. He drove to the Golden Gates Casino like a man with muscle memory, parking in the high roller section despite the rust eating through his sedan's fenders. Through binoculars, I watched him at the poker tables, betting amounts that made my stomach clench. This wasn't recreational gambling. This was the desperate flailing of a drowning man. I stayed until Thursday afternoon, documenting his losses. In 5 hours, I watched Marcus blow through what looked like $15,000. Money he clearly didn't have. That's when I overheard the conversation that changed everything. 2 men in expensive suits approached Marcus's table, the kind of men who made other gamblers suddenly find reasons to be elsewhere. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read body language. Marcus was pleading. They were done listening. One of them handed Marcus a business card. Even from across the casino floor, I could see Marcus's hands shaking as he read it. Back home, I called Frank with what I'd observed. His response was immediate. I'm coming over. An hour later, Frank sat in my kitchen, his expression darker than I'd ever seen it. Calvin, I made some calls. Marcus doesn't owe money to some neighborhood bookie. He's into the Kozlov organization for $800,000. $800,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. How does someone even owe that much? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Compound interest at 25% monthly. Miss a payment and the debt doubles. Marcus has been missing payments for months. Friday morning brought an unexpected visitor. Linda Mason stood on my doorstep, her face drawn with worry and exhaustion. Calvin, I need to talk to someone who might understand, she said, settling into my living room chair. Marcus has been different since Robert got sick. Angry, desperate. He keeps talking about solutions and making phone calls that leave him shaking. Linda, I said gently, I think Marcus is in more trouble than any of us realized. That evening, Frank delivered the final piece of the puzzle. The Kozlov organization doesn't negotiate, he said, his voice heavy. They have a reputation for extreme violence. Murder isn't uncommon when debts reach this level. I closed my notebook and looked at my old friend. So Marcus tried to kill me because he was desperate. But why me specifically? Frank was quiet for a moment. Calvin, these people don't just kill debtors. They kill families. They kill anyone who might be able to help pay the debt. You're the only person Marcus knows with real money. The weight of that revelation settled over me like a shroud. This wasn't just about Marcus's gambling addiction anymore. My entire family was in danger because of one man's desperation and $800,000 in blood money. I picked up my pen and started writing again. The engineering problem had just gotten significantly more complex and significantly more deadly. Saturday morning at Presbyterian Hospital brought the first good news in a week. Robert Sr. was sitting up in bed, color returning to his cheeks, though he still looked fragile. The insulin had nearly killed him, but his body was fighting back. Marcus sat beside his father's bed, torn between visible relief and the kind of desperation that made my skin crawl. Every few minutes his phone would buzz and his face would go white as he read whatever message had arrived. Dad's looking better, I said, settling into the chair across from Marcus. Yeah, Marcus replied, not meeting my eyes. The doctors say he should be home by Tuesday. But even as he spoke about his father's recovery, Marcus kept glancing at his phone like it was a time bomb counting down to zero. Saturday afternoon, I made a decision that Dorothy questioned, but didn't argue with. I called Secure Home Systems and arranged for a complete security installation. Neighborhood break-ins. I told the technician who arrived within 2 hours. I want cameras, motion sensors, and a direct line to the police department. The truth was simpler. I knew the Kozlov organization was watching us. At 4 that afternoon, I drove past Marcus's house and spotted them, 2 men, in a black SUV parked across the street, the kind of vehicle that screamed professional intimidation. They weren't trying to hide. Saturday evening, Marcus showed up at my door, uninvited, his hands shaking as he declined Dorothy's offer of coffee. "Calvin, I need to talk to you about family financial planning." He began settling into my living room chair. "You should really update your will. At your age, accidents happen. Families should be prepared for contingencies." The words hit me like ice water. My own son-in-law was threatening my life sitting in my living room while discussing my death. "Interesting timing for that conversation," I replied evenly. Marcus's laugh sounded forced. "Just being practical. You never know what tomorrow brings." Sunday morning brought Linda Mason to my doorstep again, this time with information that made my blood run cold. "Calvin, I'm scared," she said, wrapping her hands around the coffee mug I'd offered. "Marcus has been getting phone calls that make him shake. Men with scary voices talking about deadlines and final payments." She paused, tears forming. "Yesterday, I heard him tell someone he was working on a solution. When I asked about it, he got angrier than I've ever seen him." "Linda," I said carefully, "has Marcus ever talked about my finances?" Her face crumpled. "Last week he asked if I knew how much money you had. He said Sarah deserved to know about her inheritance." Sunday evening, I sat in my home office installing a recording app on my phone. Frank had explained Colorado's one-party consent laws. "If he threatens you again, document it," Frank had said. As I tested the app, I thought about the impossible position Marcus had put me in. He was my daughter's husband, but also a desperate man who owed $800,000 to killers. The security system beeped softly as it armed itself. I'd turned my home into a fortress, but wondered if it would be enough. Marcus's deadline was approaching, and desperate men were the most dangerous kind of all. Monday morning, I sat across from attorney Robert Walsh in his downtown Denver office, watching him review the evidence I'd compiled. The insulin poisoning report, Marcus's gambling debts, the threatening phone calls Linda had described. "Calvin," Walsh said finally, "you have a strong case for attempted murder, but proving intent in court requires more than circumstantial evidence. We need Marcus to act on his desperation." "What are you suggesting?" "We give him an opportunity to commit a crime we can document, something that shows clear intent to defraud you for money." By Monday afternoon, I'd opened a decoy account at First National Bank with $10,000, enough to make it look legitimate, not enough to hurt if things went wrong. Walsh's office had prepared fake inheritance documents showing a $1.2 million immediate payout upon my death. $1.2 million would cover the $800,000 debt plus interest with plenty left over. Walsh explained as we reviewed the documents. "It's exactly the kind of windfall a desperate man would kill for." Tuesday morning, I met with Janet Torres, the bank manager Frank had recommended. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd seen enough financial fraud to take my situation seriously. "We'll position security cameras for optimal recording," she said, reviewing the plan. "If Marcus attempts unauthorized access to your accounts, we'll have everything documented." The bank's fraud prevention team briefed me on the procedures, how they'd stall any suspicious transactions, how they'd coordinate with law enforcement if Marcus took the bait. Tuesday afternoon brought the final piece of the puzzle. Walsh's office had prepared a fake will amendment, naming Sarah and Marcus as immediate beneficiaries of a $2 million life insurance policy. "This feels like designing a bridge to catch someone trying to blow it up," I told Frank that evening as we reviewed the documents. "Sometimes you have to build the trap before you can spring it," he replied. Wednesday morning, Detective Maria Santos joined our planning session. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of sharp intelligence that made me understand why Frank trusted her. "The insulin poisoning gives us attempted murder," she said, reviewing the medical reports, "but financial fraud would seal the case. Make the bait bigger, than the desperate people take bigger risks for bigger rewards." Have you ever had to set a trap for someone you once trusted? Someone who sat at your dinner table and called you family? The moral weight of it keeps me awake at night. I'd love to hear your thoughts on when family protection crosses the line into manipulation. Please share your perspective in the comments below. Wednesday afternoon, I arranged the final act of this elaborate theater. The fake documents sat on my home office desk, positioned where Marcus would see them if he visited. The inheritance papers, the will amendment, the life insurance policy details. All of it carefully crafted to look like the solution to his $800,000 nightmare. Dorothy found me in the office that evening, staring at the papers that could either save my family or destroy what was left of it. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. I thought about Robert Sr. lying unconscious in the hospital, about the men in the black SUV, about Marcus's threat that accidents happen to elderly people. "I'm sure," I said. The trap was set. Now we waited to see if desperation would overcome whatever conscience Marcus had left. Thursday evening at the hospital, I watched Marcus struggle with emotions that would have been touching if they weren't so terrifying. Robert Sr. was sitting up joking with the nurses, color fully returned to his cheeks. The man was going to make a complete recovery from the insulin that his own son had meant for me. "Dad's looking great," Marcus said, his voice thick with what sounded like genuine relief. But his hands were shaking, and he kept checking his phone with the frantic energy of a man running out of time. "The doctors say he can go home Saturday," Linda said, squeezing her husband's hand. Marcus nodded, but I could see the war playing out behind his eyes. Relief that his father would live. Terror about what that meant for his own survival. We left the hospital around 8. I made an excuse about forgetting my reading glasses and doubled back to my house, arriving just as Marcus's car pulled into my driveway. Through my new security cameras, I watched him use the spare key Sarah had given him to let himself into my house. He went straight to my office, and within minutes he was photographing the fake inheritance documents with his phone, his hands shaking so badly he had to retake several shots. The $1.2 million life insurance policy. The will amendment naming him and Sarah as immediate beneficiaries. All of it carefully crafted to look like the solution to his nightmare. At 10 that night, Marcus showed up at my front door, his face a mask of barely controlled desperation. "Calvin, we need to talk," he said, pushing past me into the living room. I activated the recording app on my phone. "Dad's getting better, but I still need that inheritance money," Marcus said, his voice low and urgent. "The people I owe don't care about family guilt. They want their $800,000, and they want it now." "What people, Marcus?" His laugh was bitter. "Don't play stupid, old man. I need that money. Don't make me do something we'll both regret." The threat hung in the air between us like poison gas. Friday afternoon, Sarah called me in tears. "Dad, I think something's wrong with Marcus," she said. I overheard him on the phone this morning. He was telling someone he'd found a money source. $1.2 million. Enough to pay them back and disappear. My heart broke for my daughter, but I also felt a grim satisfaction. The trap was working. Friday evening, I decided it was time to force the issue. Marcus was in my kitchen when I confronted him. I know you put insulin in my wine," I said, watching his face carefully. "I know about the $800,000 you owe to the Kozlov organization." Marcus went white, then red. "You can't prove anything. The hospital has blood tests showing massive insulin levels in your father's system. A man who isn't diabetic doesn't just develop insulin poisoning." "You old fool," Marcus exploded. "You think you're so smart, but I will get that money before they kill me, one way or another." He stormed toward the door, then turned back. "Accidents happen to old people all the time, Calvin, especially ones who don't know when to mind their own business." The door slammed behind him, leaving me alone with the recording that would either save my life or sign my death warrant. The deadline was tomorrow. Marcus had taken the bait. Now we'd see if my trap was strong enough to hold a desperate man with nothing left to lose. Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, I sat in Janet Torres's office at Wells Fargo, watching the bank's security monitors with Detective Santos beside me. The trap I'd spent a week building was about to be tested. Marcus's sedan pulled into the parking lot at exactly 10:15, and even through the grainy security footage, I could see his hands shaking on the steering wheel. He sat there for a full minute, gathering courage, or maybe saying goodbye to whatever conscience he had left. When he finally walked through the bank's front doors, Marcus looked like a man walking to his execution. His face was pale, his movements jerky, and he clutched a manila folder against his chest like a shield. "I need to transfer my inheritance immediately," Marcus told the teller, his voice pitched too high. "It's urgent family business. He presented the fake documents with shaking hands, trying to appear calm while sweat beaded on his forehead. Janet Torres appeared at the teller window with professional smoothness. Sir, for a transfer of this size, we'll need to verify these documents with the account holder. Please have a seat while we process this. Marcus's face went white. You don't understand. I need this money today, right now. I understand your urgency, Janet replied calmly, but bank policy requires verification for any transfer over $50,000. From the security office, I watched Marcus pace the waiting area like a caged animal checking his phone every 30 seconds. The loan shark's deadline was Monday. He was running out of time, and desperation was making him reckless. At 11 o'clock, Detective Santos and I walked into the main banking area. Hello, Marcus, I said, my voice carrying across the marble floor. I believe you're trying to steal money to pay gambling debts. Marcus spun around, his face cycling through shock recognition and finally desperate rage. You set me up, he snarled. You set yourself up, I replied. I just gave you the opportunity to prove what you were willing to do for money. Detective Santos stepped forward, her badge visible. Marcus Mason, you're under arrest for attempted wire fraud and attempted murder. You don't understand, Marcus shouted as she read him his rights. They'll kill me if I don't pay the $800,000 by Monday. I had to try something. We have the insulin syringe with your fingerprints, Detective Santos said calmly as she cuffed him. We have bank surveillance of your attempted fraud. We have recorded threats against Mr. Brewster. And now we have your confession. Marcus's shoulders sagged as the weight of his situation finally hit him. Your father is alive because Calvin Brewster is smarter than you gave him credit for, Detective Santos replied. As they led Marcus away, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that my family was safe, sadness for Sarah, who would have to face the truth about her husband, and a grim satisfaction that justice was finally being served. Have you ever had to watch someone you once cared about face the consequences of their own choices? It's harder than you might think, even when you know they brought it on themselves. I'd appreciate hearing your thoughts on justice versus mercy in the comments below. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, Detective Santos called with the final update. Marcus had been formally charged with attempted murder in the first degree for the insulin poisoning of Robert Sr., and attempted wire fraud for trying to steal $1.2 million from my accounts. The $800,000 motive was now part of the official record. The trap had worked perfectly. Marcus was behind bars, and my family was finally safe. But the hardest part was still ahead, helping Sarah heal from the betrayal of the man she'd promised to love forever. Sunday morning brought the hardest conversation of my life. Sarah sat in my living room, her face streaked with tears, holding the divorce papers Attorney Walsh had prepared over the weekend. He poisoned his own father for gambling money, she said, her voice hollow with disbelief. What kind of monster did I marry, Dad? I sat beside my daughter, watching her world crumble in real time. You married the man you thought he was, I said gently. You couldn't have known what desperation would turn him into. Sarah looked up at me with eyes that had aged years in a single week. $800,000. He was willing to kill you for money to pay gambling debts, and instead he nearly killed the man who raised him. There was nothing I could say to make that reality easier to bear. Monday morning, the Jefferson County Courthouse buzzed with the quiet efficiency of justice being served. Marcus stood before Judge Patricia Williams in an orange jumpsuit, his hands shackled, looking like a broken man. Marcus Mason, Judge Williams read from the charges. You are accused of attempted murder in the first degree for the insulin poisoning of Robert Mason Sr., and attempted wire fraud for trying to steal $1.2 million to pay an $800,000 gambling debt. Marcus's attorney entered a plea of not guilty, but I could see in Marcus's face that he knew the evidence was overwhelming. Monday afternoon, Linda Mason came to my house, her grief palpable, but mixed with something that looked like relief. Thank you for stopping him before he actually killed someone, she said, accepting the cup of coffee Dorothy offered with shaking hands. I raised him better than this, Calvin. I don't know where I went wrong. You didn't go wrong, I told her. Addiction changes people. It makes them capable of things they never thought they'd do. But his own father, Linda's voice broke. How do you try to murder your own father? Monday evening brought news that lifted a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. Detective Santos called with an update. The Kozlov organization has been arrested, she said. FBI Financial Crimes Task Force picked up the whole operation. The threat to your family is over. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe freely. Tuesday morning, Robert Sr. insisted on giving his victim impact statement from his hospital bed. The court reporter set up her equipment while Robert, still pale but determined, looked directly at the camera that would record his words for Marcus's sentencing hearing. My son tried to kill me with insulin meant for his father-in-law. Robert said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. He nearly succeeded. I spent a week in intensive care because my own child was willing to murder me for gambling money. The words hung in the sterile hospital air like an indictment of everything Marcus had become. Tuesday afternoon, Sarah walked into the county clerk's office and filed divorce papers. I went with her, holding her hand as she signed documents that would legally end the worst mistake of her life. I choose my family, she said as we walked back to the car. The real family. The ones who protect each other instead of poisoning each other. That evening, I sat in my home office updating the engineering notebook that had helped me build the case against Marcus. The final entry was simple. Justice served. Family protected. Marcus Mason sentenced to face trial for attempted murder and wire fraud. Estimated sentence 15 to 20 years. I closed the notebook and looked out my window at the neighborhood where I'd lived peacefully for so many years. The security cameras still blinked their patient red lights, but I knew I wouldn't need them much longer. The threat was over. My family was safe. Now came the harder work of healing from betrayal and learning to trust again. Wednesday morning, Robert Sr. was finally discharged from the hospital, completely recovered from the insulin poisoning that nearly killed him. I survived being poisoned by my own son, Robert said as we helped him into the car. Now I know what real family looks like. That afternoon, I helped Sarah move into her new apartment. Linda came with us, and I watched two women discover they genuinely cared for each other beyond Marcus's toxic influence. Thank you for protecting all of us, Linda said. You saved lives, Calvin. Thursday brought final news. Frank called with updates. Marcus took a plea bargain, 15 to 20 years for attempted murder and wire fraud. The Kozlov organization is finished. FBI seized everything. Your family is completely safe. Friday evening we gathered for dinner at Romano's. Robert Sr. sat healthy at the head of the table. Linda held Dorothy's hand. Sarah looked lighter than I'd seen her in months. Frank raised his glass. To Calvin Brewster, who proved engineering principles work on family problems too. Engineering taught me every problem has a solution if you analyze it systematically, I said. Even family betrayal. Sarah squeezed my hand. We're stronger now. We know who we can trust. Driving home, I reflected on the past 4 weeks. I'd gone from retired engineer to a man who'd used 40 years of problem solving to save his family from a murderer. Age doesn't make you weak. Experience is a weapon. Wisdom is armor. Marcus had underestimated an old man with a sharp mind and protective heart. It was the last mistake he'd make as a free man. Looking back on this ordeal, I've learned that betrayal stories like mine aren't just about deception. They're about discovering your own strength when everything falls apart. God gave me the wisdom to see through Marcus's desperation before it destroyed our family. Grandpa stories often get dismissed as simple tales, but they carry hard-earned lessons about protecting those we love. The Lord works in mysterious ways, and I believe He guided my engineering mind to build the perfect trap that saved not just my life, but Robert Sr.'s dignity and Sarah's future. Betrayal stories teach us that family isn't always blood. It's the people who stand by you when the world crumbles. These grandpa stories matter because they show that age brings wisdom, not weakness. Experience is our greatest weapon against those who would harm us. Grandpa stories prove that with God's guidance and systematic thinking, even the most complex family problems have solutions. Through all the pain and betrayal stories I've witnessed, I've learned that the Almighty protects those who protect others. Sometimes the best defense is a well-planned offense. If my story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you faced family betrayal? How did you handle it? Please share your experiences. Hit that subscribe button, and let's build a community where wisdom and truth matter.